found that they had been throwing, really just littering these blast walls and cement blocks, crunching down and destroying the ancient pavement that was used by legendary kings like Nebuchadnezzar and Alexander the Great. So this had been destroyed. One of the things that I found when I was there is that because of all of this reportage that we had, that Babylon is not really anything worthwhile because there was a terrible reconstruction done by Saddam Hussein, and so there's nothing ancient there. And it's true, there are some really bad reconstructions that were done during Saddam Hussein's era that should never have been allowed to take place. On the other hand, the military occupiers seem to think that everything was a reconstruction. And because they're not archaeologists, they couldn't tell the difference between a reconstruction and an ancient wall. So they just assumed that everything was a reconstruction. And I like to show this picture because on the left is a photograph taken at the end of the 19th century when the German archaeologist Koldewey first started excavating there between 1899 and 1917. He stopped with the First World War. And you can see the walls as they emerged out of the ground intact. So when I'm telling you, these are really the ancient walls. There's this, pictorial photographic evidence to show that this is the case. And I think people need to understand this a little bit more. And here are the walls as they are today, but bits and pieces were being hacked away and removed, and they're actually in much worse condition now. This photograph, I'm here in 2004, but it's actually became much worse in the following months when more of the wall was taken out and the dragons and magical creatures were damaged. I'm sorry this didn't come out. This is the Hellenistic theater of Alexander the Great, and what I wanted to show you here is that the military actually very specifically used it, I think, knowing that it was, not because they didn't know what Babylon was and they accidentally took it without having any clue what it was. In my opinion, it was a decision that was made rather carefully because they did take advantage of the kind of symbolic value of the history of the site, because they did conduct their own military ceremonies in the theater of Alexander the Great, and they did liken their entrance into the site in 2003 to Alexander and his troops entering Babylon in the 4th century BC. This is an image of Maryam Amran Musa and one of her assistants. She's the director in charge of the site, and she's looking at the tracks of heavy vehicles that are that were taken through the site. But the reason that I also put up her photograph is to remind myself to say to you that one of the other issues that I would like us to discuss today, if we have time, is the issue of the voices that are heard and the voices that are not heard in this war in general, but especially when it comes to the question of cultural heritage and history and any other sort of issue unrelated to politics. It seems to me that what's happened is that the voices of Iraqi scholars are not being listened to, which is not to say that they're being censored in an outright way, but they're just being simply disregarded. And if you would read all the many reports about Babylon or the libraries and the museums and the archaeological sites, you would think that there were no Iraqi archaeologists actually doing anything there. But what I would like to point out is that they're actually working very hard, risking their lives, working against all odds to get things done, and receiving no credit for their work. And I think this really needs to come to an end. And I think that all of us here have to insist that the work of our Iraqi colleagues is acknowledged. It's no longer acceptable to behave in an imperialist way as if only Western scholars can have any real or authentic knowledge, and that non-Western scholars don't have anything valid or correct or balanced to say. It cannot be the case that when a non-European says something, it's unbalanced, and when a European says something, it is balanced. I think we really do have to correct this, because there are so many scholars who are working there whose work is not being acknowledged, and I would very much like to see that come to an end. This is the U.S. military base at Ur. This is the ziggurat of Ur. Ur is the legendary birthplace of Abraham. Of course, it was also taken over as a military base. They recently shut that a couple of months ago. Samarra, the medieval Islamic royal city, there was also a military base there. The top of the minaret was used as a sniper position, and so it was blown up. Of course, the Al-Askari Mosque is in Samarra, and so when the Al-Askari Mosque was blown up, when the dome of it was blown up, I read a great deal about it in the press in New York and here in London. Most of the discussions focused on the fact that it was a Shiite shrine, and who blew it up, who didn't blow it up, but we didn't really hear about the fact that this is considered to be art historically a very important monument. This is a magnificent work of architecture with a beautiful dome that was designed in 1623. The building originally goes back to the 10th century, and the gilding of the dome is from the 19th century. So it's a very typically Iraqi mosque with these exquisite, very thin columns that you don't see in mosques everywhere, and this kind of splayed out golden dome. For those of you who are Iraqi, will recognize this style immediately, because mosque styles change all over the world, and this is a very specifically local style that you immediately recognize as a local style. The site of Hatra, which is from the 2nd century BC to the 2nd century AD, at one point there was a munitions dump in there, which of course this became a problem, because what could you do? You can't really move it. Do you blow it up? Can you blow up a munitions dump in a 2nd century important site? So these were just, it was like putting out fires. There were so many issues that had to be considered all at once in 2003 and 2004. And of course, it was not just ancient and Islamic sites that were used as military bases. This is Ismail Fattah's Shaheed Monument, built in 1983, which, by the way, is also illustrated in every textbook on the history of Islamic art. It's considered to be an excellent example of Islamic modern art, and it's very well known in the art historical profession. I think you can see the tanks and military vehicles and this is in Baghdad, so it's not really clear to me why you need to use this as a military base. There are many other places in Baghdad that can be used as a military base if you have to occupy a country, that is. The other issue that one hasn't thought about, or people have not really considered, is something less pleasant, which is the